everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we kick this off, I would like to point out to the audience that we welcome questions. Please utilize the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Type in questions as they come to you, and we will address those at the conclusion. So I'd now like to turn this over to Steven Saltzstein, Force Family Office's CEO.
Thank you, Callie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a fantastic symposium for you. You know, the macroeconomic dynamics in the boron industry are absolutely in 5E Advanced Materials' favor. One of the largest mines in the world looks like it's shutting down. There's limited friendly supply, and boron is on the review list as a strategic metal, etc. So there could be some, real leverage in this story. The good news is that 5E Advanced is being led by one of the most knowledgeable professionals in the industry. So it's my pleasure to welcome Paul Weibel. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Steven. It's great to be here today.
Yeah. And just to begin with, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background, your career? How'd you get to the mining industry?
Sure. Happy to walk through this. So I'm originally from the East Coast. I've been in California for about 4 years. Joined 5E as the CFO. I think I moved out here August 2021, so literally a little over 4 years. And the reason I joined 5E was, one, it was the prospect of taking a company public in the US. Two was ultimately there was a lot of parallels between the boron market and the lithium market 15 years ago from a structural supply demand perspective. So that boded very well for the underlying fundamentals of the business. And, but originally an East Coast guy. I did my undergrad at Lehigh, was a double major in finance and accounting, was on the men's wrestling team there, which Lehigh is kind of known for two things, engineering and wrestling.
Yeah. Is that Division One? Is that Division One?
It was D1, yes, correct.
That's impressive.
So I think we finished my freshman and sophomore year, fourth and third in the NCAAs.
Yeah, wow.
Like similar to like a Duke basketball.
Yeah, no doubt. I was a wrestler too, so I could totally appreciate it.
I wrestled heavyweight, so I was recruited to be I was a kind of a bigger 189 pounder in high school. And I was blessed by the assistant coach at the time at Lehigh was a guy named Kerry McCoy. He was the heavyweight on the Olympic team in Athens and in Sydney. He was my assistant coach. So I was basically like his workout partner and a sponge. And I realized I was really blessed to have him as a coach. And I ended up, was recruited as a backup and ended up starting all 4 years and was a captain my 5th year and went to the NCAAs twice. So
I can't tell people enough what that means about your fortitude, your work ethic, your ability and willingness to sacrifice. There's no question that translates into you running this company.
You gotta like it tough, not just tough, but really tough.
Yeah.
But so out of Lehigh, I actually got a job at Bear Stearns, and I was in equity sales and trading. And my first day on the job, so this was 2007. My first day on the job was the day the BSAM funds blew up, which started subprime.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Later, I was not deemed a transition employee because I was basically 1 year out of college. When it became Bear 383 Madison became JP Morgan Chase, I ended up getting a job at a smaller bank. Got laid off in March of 2009, so welcome to Wall Street. And but I had a good fundamental experience on kind of front office, equity, capital markets transactions. And then I was like, what do I do? And so I was living in North Jersey in East Rutherford, waiting tables. And I was like, you know what? I need to go utilize my Lehigh degree. And so I ended up going to PwC outside of Philadelphia, kind of humbly rebooted the career, sat for my CPA, was really good because I understood debits and credits kind of during that time frame, and worked myself way back to the buy side in a business that focused on more venture-oriented holdco structure in mining and mining services, and was there for about 7.5 years. And the opportunity at ABR, which was 5E's predecessor, came across my desk, and I said, let's, it was also COVID during the time, so we were like basically locked inside in southeastern Pennsylvania for, I don't know, 2 years or whatever it was. And he said, let's go to California. So that's what got me out here, and was the CFO for the first 3 years or till June of 2024, and got put in.
Did you have vision into the electric vehicle, battery boom? Like, was that
I
part of
did
your thought process?
at Genworth. I did, and there was kind of that first real big pop in 2017 where it was like, wow, electric vehicles are very real, and the lithium market's kind of quite interesting because it was incredibly opaque, lack of transparency. Contracts were basically done, buyer to seller, very little transparency. That market has come a massive long way where there's a ton of transparency, almost to the negative, where it's like everyone knows the lithium market right now is $9 a kg.
Right.
I do think pricing may go a little higher, but on the lithium market, you see some really large players, Rio, Exxon's dipping their toe in the water, and Smackover. And these are groups that like really know, they have massive balance sheets and they like to scale. And I do believe that, I don't know, I think the cost curve is a real thing. And these are groups, or at least where I think it's going, is whoever can own the low end of the cost curve is really going to be the long-term winners. Because I don't know if prices go back to where they ultimately, I don't know if we see $25, $30 a kg down the road, because I think there is supply. Demand is definitely growing, no question. And but I think you have some serious players coming online or getting into this space that know how to deploy CapEx and get really competitive on the cost curve.
And is supply in boron, meaning prospective mine sites, that's much more limited than prospective mine sites in lithium, isn't it?
So that was one of, going back to why I joined 5E, there was a lot of parallels between the lithium market and the boron market. 15, 20 years ago, you had really only 4 major global players in the lithium market. It was Rockwood Lithium, which was ultimately acquired by Albemarle. So that is how Albemarle entered the lithium world, was their acquisition of Rockwood. It was Tianqi, SQM out of Chile, and then FMC, which spun out Livent. So it was like 3, 4 players, and it was kind of fragmented. But you had this massive poolside demand thematic, and it was a simple poolside demand thematic because you were like, okay, Elon's proven the electric vehicle works. And so, range is going up, technology is going to go in there. You had, ultimately, well, you had the upstream, the minerals, and then you had the, where you take those minerals, convert it into battery conversion capacity in the midstream, and then downstream was the actual OEMs who needed a lithium ion battery to make the vehicle run. Very simple, like the world's going to need more electric vehicles. So as a result, the world needs more lithium and cobalt and manganese, magnesium, graphite, etc. So it was really black and white, whereas in the boron market, it's a little bit more opaque, and boron goes into 300 applications, but the supply side is really dominated by 2. Now, what's different between the lithium market and the boron market is that, well, fast forward today, lithium's actually relatively common. There's hundreds of lithium prospective or actual mining companies across the whole mining cycle. In the boron space, you have these 2 companies that it's a global oligopoly, and there's like 5 prospective projects or sizable boron deposits. So large quantities of boron are inherently very rare. Now, if you piece out like where are those 5, like 3 are Serbian based, 2 are US based, 2 have their permits, and 1 actually has a decent sized demonstration plants setting the table so we can successfully scale, and that's 5E.
I apologize because you didn't mention Turkey. So is that
so of the oligopoly, there's 2, right?
Right.
So the Turkish government is actually, they have an existing seat at the table, and they are one of the existing producers. So when you think about 85% of supply today is dominated by two groups. It's Edimaden, which is the state of Turkey, and
Gotcha.
Rio Tinto has
Right.
an asset in California called US Borax that is about 20% of the market. Those roles used to be flip-flopped, where Rio dominated about 60% of the market and the Turks were about 20.
Right.
In turn flip-flopped. And then when you talk about the prospective projects that could come online, there's really only 5.
Gotcha. Now, I do want to get into Rio, and there's a lot of kind of end of life news there, which is great for 5E. Before I do that, though, I just want to take a step back and, you know, what have you learned as a leader in the mining industry?
Sure. I think when you want to scale up a project, the team around you is incredibly important. And you're not always going to get the team right at first. And so I can say today, like, we have a very good team. Our team's great. We have people that are incredibly motivated to stand this project up. We've been mining for, gosh, come January, it'll be 2 years. We've been operating the pilot plant for a year and a half. So we have the team that's demonstrated it, knows how to do that. But we didn't have those people. They weren't all in place when I came here 4 years ago. And so, as a smaller organization, you're kind of only as good as your people. And so you lack, as a smaller organization trying to kind of scale up, the Exxon processes and principles, and you're kind of figuring it out as you go. And that's where I can say, especially over the last 2 years, year and a half, we now have the right team. We have a great board that, they're lean and mean, but you can summarize our project kind of, and the directors, their skill sets they bring by, you have Graham is more of a chemical plant background from Shell. You have Bryn on the solution mining side, Barry on the financing side, and Kurt on the policy side. And as you think about that board, they've done wonders by sort of understanding what the business needs and then tapping their own personal networks to really provide expertise that supports our business. And that has really helped us begin to put the policies and the principles in place as you go to scale up a large scale capital project.
So tell us more about 5E. I mean, can we talk about the Fort Candy project, takeaways from the feasibility studies, et cetera?
Sure. So our project is based in California. We sit about halfway between LA and Las Vegas. It's an awesome project to be a part of because if you want to be at the beach in 2 hours, you could. It's not like, when I was at Genlit, there was a project we were involved with in the northern Atacama. It was a 7.5-hour drive from Santiago, and you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. This project sits 2 miles off of Interstate 40 in proximity to major natural gas transmission lines, and we actually have a megawatt of shore power today. So there's really good infrastructure, and you talk about work-life balance, and like, you have that opportunity working at 5E. So that's exciting. And so we are, I think, I kind of went on a tangent there, but I think it was, what about 5E? What are we looking to do? Was the question?
No, the question is like, I want to better understand the Fort Candy project, and I want to understand your takeaways from the feasibility studies.
Sure. And so there's a long history of Fort Candy. So you have the location where we are, and then the discovery of the minerals was actually done back in the 60s. So long exploration track record that ultimately resulted in a very, very large discovery of a large colemanite deposit. Colemanite is a calcium-based boron mineral. There's 4 types of minerals where boron is commonly found. Colemanite is very much viewed as like the Cadillac or the Mercedes-Benz because it's very easy to leach. Today, I think we're the only colemanite left in North America. The majority of colemanite is the only, at least today, is Turkey-based. All major mining permits are in place, which is critical. We have our federal permits with the BLM. We have our state permit with the California Department of Conservation. And we also have an underground injection control permit with US EPA. So set up for success, and that dovetailed into ultimately we have our licenses where we've been operating at pilot plant scale, and that tied into a pre-feasibility study, which, you know, the feedback we've gotten has been incredibly positive, because ultimately that feasibility study is underpinned on the 18 months of mining data that we've been operating at the demonstration plant, and all the vendor testing we've been doing as part of the pre-feed process to really de-risk this to be successful in scaling up. And so, you know, pre-feasibility economics are about a $725 million NPV, and that's just phase 1. That's really just the first scale. You have a ton of optionality in the project where we can go into various different derivatives which command higher margins. You can always go bigger because it is a sizable resource, so you can get economies of scale where you're basically spreading those fixed costs over additional tons of product, which then leads to more accretive NPVs and IRRs. And so we, you know, and then it's a 19% project IRR. So it's, you know, feedback quite good. And that's been from, you know, regulators all the way to investors.
And let's just talk about boron. Can you talk to me about the market size and, you know, generally the industries it's used for? And certainly, please don't leave magnets off the list.
Yeah, so boron is the 5th element on the periodic table. It's very much a super material, and I think in the first webinar we did, I kind of draw the analogy that if Tony Stark is to build an Iron Man suit, it's a boron-based suit. Boron chemically is light, heat resistant, energy dense. It's also a micronutrient, so it has a ton of chemical properties that are applicable to everyday life as we know it, and do a lot of really cool things. So it goes into really boring stuff such as ceramics and cleaning supplies. When I was at college in Lehigh, I would wash all my clothes on Saturday, and I would use a solid-based detergent, which is boron. It goes into all forms of glass, from LCD, every, you know, awesome high-end 4K TV that we're watching has boron in it. Textile fiberglass as well as Pyrex glass, it's required. And then it goes into really cool applications such as boron carbide. That's the 3rd hardest material on planet Earth. That's Kevlar and tank armor. It goes into ferroboron, so permanent magnets. Those neodymium permanent magnets are those high-end magnets. While yes, rare earths are the star of the show, you cannot make those magnets without ferroboron, albeit it's only about 2% of the magnet, but it's critical to the actual magnet performance. And so you can break out the growth and the demand side into kind of 3 pillars. You have glass, which is growing at about 3.5% to 4% per year. You have non-glass, which is about 4.5%. And then you have your specialties, and that's growing at about 8%, which the magnet piece is growing at CAGRs of 14, 15, 16% per year, depending on the study you look at. And when you put that in, the world's going to need more boron. And so the other interesting aspect is that, like, there's value in use here. So when you look at the kind of bottoms up analysis, you cannot make many of these downstream or end use applications without boron. For example, cellulose insulation, which is what, you know, you blow in on roofs and attics. Boric acid is the key ingredient to basically give that insulation its fire efficacy. There's not another replacement for that. And so if insulation was to continue selling their insulation, they're ultimately regulated. You know, houses can't burn down. There needs to be certain standards met. And the boron is what is added or dosed to that insulation that lets the insulation meet the standards. So that's one just critical example. Glass is very similar. You cannot make high strength glass without the boron. What do you need for boron? You need sand or silica, and you need boron, and you need to put it in a glass furnace and mix it together. So the end use applications, boron is inherently very, very critical.
So speaking of being critical, so can you talk about Rio Tinto? What's going on there? Are they the largest supplier in the world or the second largest supplier?
They are the second largest.
Okay, second largest
in the world. They're about, and they have a portfolio, and
I just want to like review what you said earlier, right? There's basically two players and three potentials, and you guys being the only domestic possibility.
Correct. You have Ioneer, who's also U.S., but they're predominant. They're a lithium project, and then they have a boron byproduct. But the reality is at first phase production, we'll produce about 130,000 short tons, 118,000 metric tons. We have the ability to go bigger, no question about that. And Ioneer's maybe about like 130 metric tons. So they're, both have their permits, but both don't have their long-term financing yet. And then you look at Rio, who, yes, they are about 20% of global boron supply. And Rio has really a portfolio of products. They make boric acid. They also make sodium borates, which is another product. They make boron oxide, which is dehydrated boric acid, very simply speaking. They make zinc borate. So they have about 8 or 9 products in their portfolio. And so that dovetails into about 20% of the global boron market, okay? Most recently, and so a little history, and this is all public information, so
Sure.
nothing's proprietary or not.
Yep.
It's all available in the public domain. So Rio's been operating for approximately 100 miles. They sit about 70 miles up the road from 5E. They had a reserve downgrade in 2018. Now, you can look at every year, Rio does produce financials, and in their segment information is the business performance of US Borax. And they actually provide fantastic metrics. They provide the revenue from US Borax, which is 100% subsidiary of Rio. So what's reported is ultimately what that business did. They provide their production volume. Now, they report it in a B203, which is an oxide form. So you have their 9 different product lines, or 8 or 9 product lines approximately, all rolling up into a standard equivalent unit of production. They have revenue, EBITDA, net earnings, CapEx, depreciation, operating assets, and employees. And you can take this, and I can do basic financial analysis and come up with what's their margin profile for this business. And you can then use the revenue and their EBITDA to approximate cost, right? Revenue minus EBITDA gives a cost profile. And you can then divide that by their production and come up with cost on a B203 basis. And so from 2017 on a B203 basis, their costs were $767 per ton. And in 2024, they're $11.50 per ton, which is about a 50-some% increase, kind of between those two periods. And so and this is where I have an opinion, but ultimately they had to reserve downgrade in 2018. They have a defined mine life, but cutoff grade in the mining world is a very real thing. Cutoff grade by definition is essentially, at what point does the cost of mining become uneconomical? And so what ends up happening is take 5E, we have about like 8% boron grade on a B203 basis, right? We, as part of our technical report, have a section that we do an analysis that says, at what point would we continue to process minerals at what grade where it doesn't make economic sense? And that's a 2% cutoff. But what happens between 8% and 2% is that the cost goes materially up as you get closer to 2%, i.e., you're feeding much less high quality ore into your above ground plant, and that costs more money, et cetera, and then your margins will decrease. But that's about the point where we would, in theory, stop producing. And what ends up happening, similarly with a large open pit mine, as cutoff grade is a very real thing, as you deplete down, what ends up happening is you tend to have mined, and this is more hypothetical talking here, but as you deplete down, you've mined the high grade ore. As an up and coming miner, what we want to do is focus our mining efforts in the highest grade concentration. Our solution, because we mine in solution, we want to target mining the highest grade concentrations underground, because guess what? Boron is the valuable mineral and concentrations are there. So the cost to actually process that tends to be lower, requires less hydrochloric and sulfuric acid, and in turn, less energy. So what for Rio or open pit miners, what ends up happening is as you mine, there's a couple of drivers in cost. One, you need a truck. Two, you need a person to drive the truck. Three, you need fuel. Okay. So every day that goes by, the pit gets a little bit deeper. Fine. It doesn't materially increase cost. But what does materially increase cost for open pit mines towards the end of life as you're depleting down is that truckload of ore or minerals, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, or earlier in the mine life, hypothetically was 10% boron, right? As you deplete down and that high-grade ore has been mined or selectively processed, maybe it's 6%. So you need to work that much harder and move that much ore to generate the same production profile you did in years prior. And
Right.
that's why as grades decrease, cutoff grade is a very real analysis where ultimately it drives increase in costs and reduced profitability.
So what do you think their conclusion is going to be?
Well, and this is all public. I don't know because I don't sit in Rio's boardroom, but ultimately they had a new CEO come on board and they made kind of holistic changes at the structural level or segment level. And so the first is that they now have 3 business units. It's iron ore, it's copper is 1 and 2, and then the third is their aluminum lithium business. And so they had this other business unit, which is their industrial minerals. And that's where they have a diamonds business, a titanium business. They also have the borate business. And so the head of their borate business will be leaving the company in October. And the industrial minerals business is kind of eliminated. And those businesses, I think the article said, sit in the office of the chief commercial officer and are under strategic review. So you can draw your own conclusions on that. It's definitely an interesting time in the borate market. This news came after the USGS released their draft critical minerals list. Boron wasn't on it. We've been really trying to get in front of USGS and say like, hey, there's a canary in the coal mine and the canary's died in the cage. You got a problem here.
Right.
You should, we have a position of strength in the borate market now.
Yeah.
We really, we're at risk of
we don't want to get ourselves in another situation like we have with China and these critical earth metals. Because, also if you look at the largest producer, they're kind of a frenemy. We don't have the closest relationship with Turkey.
Yeah, listen, Turkey's NATO, no question. But
we definitely want to be. I'm just like, why are we making that mistake again? Or why?
I don't think it's in customers' interest because, it's an oligopoly as is, having additional suppliers there, gives customers options.
Yeah. Yeah. And listen, and, especially, look, it's one thing in light of, let's say, a more commodity-driven industry around glass, fiberglass, things of that nature, but it's completely another around these magnets, which, we've already seen we've been held hostage, on these time and time again. Bottom line, that puts you guys in the catbird seat, and there's no reason why all of this shouldn't be fast tracked. It's a great. I mean, you guys are in a great position.
No, I agree. And I think we have all the mining permits. There's actually fundamental supply demand dynamics that are really saying, hey, we need an additional producer or producers to come online at commercial scale. Customers are kind of telegraphing that as we've been qualifying. Our phones are ringing. We've been qualifying multiple products across multiple different business segments. And there's definitely a need, and we've at least been demonstrating, we have a very systematic approach, that was underpinned off of 18 months of mining data and chemical plant processing. As we've gone through the pre-feed engineering, we've done all of our vendor testing. So a lot of times junior miners, they'll do their vendor testing with their OEMs, which is a little bit of an incremental cost, but it's not a major cost driver. They'll defer that towards feed engineering. And when you go into feed engineering, you really need to ensure that your flow sheet's not changing, because feed engineering is like 30,000 engineering hours. So if you want to stay on time and under budget, you really do need to lock down that flow sheet and not have changes. So we did all of our vendor testing during the pre-feed phase.
So there's a bunch of audience questions. So I definitely want to give Callie time to get to those. So Callie, I'm going to let you take it over.
Okay, thank you so much. And some of these you may have touched on, so you might just want to go into a little detail. But will boron become as critical as lithium or copper for EVs, renewable power, and advanced materials?
Sure, we think it should. I view the kind of what boron does is it's a supporting actor, right? It goes into 300 applications. Many of those applications, some of them are boring, some of them are really high tech and critical, but it makes life as we know it very much exist. And listen, it's a global oligopoly, so there's been a lot of educating in Washington, D.C. There's 3 lists. There's a Department of Defense list. Boron sits on that one. The defense gets it. They'll be like, we can't operate the U.S. government defense department without boron. You have the Department of Energy has their own list. You need to score a 22. The last time they did their assessment, boron scored a 21, which is kind of like par for the course. As you think like it's close, but like people aren't quite sure. We think we can get it there the next time. And then there's the USGS critical minerals list. Listen, we're going to submit a very, very convincing public comment. We think a lot of the news flow that is occurring today is incredibly relevant to the boron market. And I think, listen, I think there's a decent chance, can't predict the future, but we're going to present a very convincing argument to the USGS as part of the comment letter that boron has its place on the critical minerals list. And if you look at the boron market, there's like one way to play this in the stock market, and that's 5E. So I think there's a tail scenario where if boron gets put on the critical minerals, all of a sudden people are going to say, well, what's boron? Why is it important? And they start to do the research, and they're going to realize like there's really only one way to invest in a boron company, and that's 5E.
Great, thank you. And can you outline your approach to these partnerships, whether it's Department of Defense, and do you envision joint ventures, technology licensing, or staying independent?
Sure. So I've gotten the question, and it was big news where MP Materials got that like really good deal, and it was good for the government and it was good for shareholders where they got a preferred. Now the U.S. government's the largest shareholder in MP. They have bankable offtake agreements, and they deployed some additional loan facilities through the Office of Strategic Capital. The U.S. government did that because like we're way behind the 8 ball with relative to what the Chinese have done. And so I think that especially on the magnet side, there's opportunity to provide a ferroboron or elemental boron component that can fully, because right now, those two minerals really aren't produced in the United States. And ultimately, if you want to have a purely mine to magnet domestic, secure supply chain, the boron piece still has a bit of vulnerability. So I think like for us, we view as like there's a great opportunity there on the magnet side. But the first thing we need to get done is we need to get boron flagged as a critical mineral, and the government to actually say like, oh gosh, this is something we really do need to invest in. So that's where the comment letter comes in. From there, I think like there's a great example where we've kind of played our part. There's a company that we received $49 million of federal grant money from the DoD to work on boron carbide. Like almost all boron carbide, not all, but the majority of it comes from China. So that's for our munitions and our like armor is all carbide coming out of China. And there's a company that has basically working on manufacturing armor grade boron carbide in the United States. We've partnered with them. We've been providing them product. They have successfully made armor grade boron carbide in their process. And so that is one part that 5E is playing its part in basically providing the upstream feedstock so that there's a midstream producer that's already existing that can basically shore up the industrial base for America's defense needs.
Thank you. And kind of dovetails into this. Have you secured any offtake agreements or letters of intent with customers? And if so, which sectors?
Sure. So we have qualified I think 15 different customers. And so the most important ones kind of out of the gate, because we want to debt finance our project. And to debt finance our project, we're going to need bankable offtake agreements. So that's no different than when I wanted to buy my first house. I needed an offer letter from PwC or my W-2 from PwC that says I make X dollars per year. That offtake agreement ultimately kind of provides the same comfort for any lender that will provide project finance. What's the price and what's the quantity that they're going to pay to buy our boron? And so it was really critical that we get through our PFS, because that was really underpinned. First of all, we have a very high degree of confidence in our CapEx. The CapEx is about $435 million. That is inclusive of cogen as well as contingency. Two, we needed to get comfort over our OpEx profile. And the OpEx is created by a mass and energy balance. Really what's coming out of the ground at a molecular weight, how much raw materials do we need to process that, and how much energy is going to be consumed in that process. That derives our cash costs. So once we did that with the PFS, we understood we had really hard, good numbers on and to be able to talk offtake. We're now presenting terms on offtake. We've also had to kind of go through some qualification steps, and this has been a focus, at least on LCD glass, of which you have the likes of Corning, who are some of the largest LCD glass manufacturers in the world.
And what do you see as the fastest demand growth as far as the markets, and what do you expect for boron consumption over the next 5 to 10 years?
Sure. So like what we're going to produce is boric acid, and we will also produce sodium. Now in our kind of phase 1, sodium borates are not included. We're going to process a boric acid, and that's what we'll make. There's the optionality down the road to take our sodium and then create a sodium borate, but that would kind of be on a potential phase 2 or expansion. The boric acid market is about 1.2 to 1.3 million metric tons. We'll kind of come in at about 130,000 tons. And the major drivers there is you have boric acid going into ferroboron, which is going into permanent magnets. That's a high growth application. Glass is there, but glass is kind of not growing at the CAGRs you see the specialties growing at. And so, but if you look at who we've qualified glass, we've qualified boron carbide, regular chemicals, textile fiberglass, Pyrex. And so there's a span of industries. And the goal for us is we're going to have, our bankable customers, and then we're going to build out a product profile of, not one, but many customers where there's essentially diversification, because diversification over time is inherent that, those customers will be there and will continue to grow. They can provide, they can pay the prices we're going to need to ultimately stand this project up.
And where do you stand today on the transition from small scale facility production to full commercial output?
Yeah, so we are, and this dovetails a little bit into some of the catalyst here, but we're at kind of this stage gating point where we've completed pre-feed and we're ready to go to feed. Before we go to feed and we target kind of a full stage gate in November-ish, we're doing some kind of, call it, I don't know if bridging's the right word, but kind of preparatory steps. The first is there's a trade-off study on our crystallizer. We think, and this is really to fully vet an opportunity that can make us more commercial, more economic at commercial scale. So we're doing a little bit of testing. We've also begun all of our purchase order documentation. So as we go into feed, we're going to have de-risk feed so we can maintain, be on time and on budget. So if we stage gate to feed, that would be about November, and then you're about 8 to 9 months. And at that point, you'll have a bankable feasibility study, and you can take the project to FID, assuming you have all of your financing secured to build the commercial plant. One of the big things with going into feed is it's a lot of engineering hours, and feeds are going to be about $8 to $8.5 million because there's so much engineering that gets done during that phase. So what you want to do is you really need to be fully financed. We're about to apply for a smaller EXIM loan. EXIM has a program called the Engineering Multiplier Program. They'll loan up to about $8.5 million for feed engineering. Terms would be, and this is my guess, 5 to 7 years. It's relatively cheap paper, treasuries plus 100 bips. It will require either some sort of guarantee or collateral package, which is to be expected because ultimately, if you think about project finance, any larger facility will be secured for a $285 million loan. But we think we can get that underwritten, kind of right around when we kick off feed. And that's truly non-dilutive. And then that could ultimately be refied once you scale up and you get the larger, broader project finance. So we'll be applying for that imminently, been kind of working through the application as we speak. And I think that's a major catalyst that will help 5E.
And then where do you see your timeline for achieving positive cash flow from operations?
The goal would be to have this built in 2028 and towards probably back, depending on the commissioning schedule, which will definitely be probably 4 to 6 months. You'd look at to close out 2028 with kind of first commercial sales, which if you think about this administration, the next election is going to be in November 2028 and inauguration being in kind of January-ish, 29. This administration has the opportunity to stand up a brand new project and kind of firm up the boron supply chain during this term.
Great. Well, that concludes the questions. And for the audience, if you have additional questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to facilitate an introduction to the 5E team. In turn, they will have all of your information as well. But Paul, I do want to turn it back over to you for any final words before we close out.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Listen, the boron market is an incredibly interesting market right now where you have interesting structural supply and demand fundamentals and changes occurring real time. And there's very few projects and ways to invest in this in the actual market. We've been demonstrating, we have the team, we've been doing this for 18 months. It'll be 24 months here on the mining side in January, and we're really focused and gonna be successful in scaling this up at commercial and in commercial capacity. And so, you know, I'm fully available to, I know Forrest has been making kind of one-off introductions for any potential investors there. We can schedule a call, you know, reach out to Paula Ashton at PRA. She's on the bottom of all of her and Michael are on the bottom of our press releases. They'll coordinate, and we'll look to schedule time to kind of do a deeper dive. And if anyone has any questions, happy to have a follow-up call on the back of this.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope everyone has a great day.